isn't it? And people to think, and that's just a notification that if you're happy for it to be recorded, so hopefully then we can share it afterwards on our YouTube channel as well. So I'll just wait a little bit longer in case there's some more that decide to join, and if they join during, then they can join. What I was going to say as well is, if you've got any questions during, please use the chat function to put questions in as we go along. Or, you know, when we get to the end, we'll give you an opportunity to ask questions as well, and you're welcome to put your hand up and you know, ask questions, any questions that you like at the end as well. But what we'll do probably is myself and Katie will run through our presentations, isn't it, and go through what the latest is and what we think what may be coming next, and then we'll give you an opportunity to ask questions. But as I said, if you want to put questions in the chat as you go along, that's fine as well. Mae'r cyflwyniad bod yma pnawn mae'n mynd I fod yn Saesneg, yn fe? Ond os chi moyn gofyn cwestiwn yn Gymraeg, mae'n croeso chi wneud hynny hefyd, ond ni dreul ateb hynny yn Gymraeg a cyfieithu hefyd. So as I was saying, if you're welcome to ask questions in Welsh as well, although the presentation is going to be in English, isn't it? So if you've got any questions, you're welcome to raise those in Welsh, and we'll you know, translate them when we get to that stage and questions as well. Okay, I think we're going to make a start because I think most people have logged in now. So if we put the presentation on, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so the first thing perhaps to say is you're joining us as a combined webinar as part of Agri-Advisor and Rural Advisor for the first time today as well. So Rural Advisor, for those of you that don't know, is a kind of sister company of Agri-Advisor, which was set up about 3 to 4 months ago now, and it specialises in providing kind of business advice and consultancy advice to farmers and those living in rural areas. We've been doing that kind of advice within Agri-Advisor for some time, but we've now kind of hived that out, if you like, into Rural Advisor as a separate business. So we're doing work in relation to planning, land agency, and policy advice within Rural Advisor going forward. So that's what our biggest news, I suppose, in terms of changes in terms of Agri-Advisor over the last 12 months. Obviously, it's been a busy and unusual period of time as well, isn't it? And you know, I hope all of you are well as well, and have been as busy as we have in the last 12 months. But what we're here to do this afternoon is focus on where we are in terms of agricultural policy. And the picture is very different in terms of Wales and England. And what I'm going to try and do is run through the kind of the English proportion of it, maybe making some comments in addition to Wales. And I'm going to pass to Katie then to deal with the Wales policy side of things and where we are in terms of what is available at the moment in terms of schemes. So if we start with, you know, what's happened so far, isn't it, and the kind of consultations that we've had, because really since the announcement in relation to Brexit, that's what we've had is consultations, isn't it, really, and kind of considerations as to what the changes may be going forward. In England, we had the Health and Harmony kind of consultation, which was looking at, you know, what kind of policies they were looking to have going forward in a post-Brexit world. There was then the kind of environmental and land management policy discussion looking at ELM and, you know, kind of the policies and programmes that are going to put in place thereafter. And we've also got a live consultation in England at the moment in relation to direct payments to farmers going forward, the delinking of payments and lump sum exit schemes, a scheme as well, which I'm going to come on to in some detail in a little while. The picture obviously is different in relation to Wales. So we've had a number of consultations. The common theme within those consultations, I think it's probably true to say, is sustainable farming, sustainable agriculture, and that's been consistent since since Wales started to look at what the agricultural policy in Wales is going to look like, post Brexit. And more recently, we had the consultation which closed in March on the Agricultural Wales Bill, which really looked at the powers that we had in Wales and how those powers were going to be dealt with going forward. under the new rules. But Katie's going to talk to us a little bit more about that in a little while. So where have we got to in terms of England? So we've got the Agriculture Act 2020, which was in place at the end of last year and ready for Brexit in January. And this, it's really important to remember, mainly concentrates on England. So developing new farm support in England, giving ministers the power to do that, dealing with agricultural markets, marketing conditions, carcass classifications, and also kind of provisions in relation to meeting obligations under the World Trade Organization agreement as well. So it talks very much about public goods, doesn't it? And it kind of sets out, what the position is in terms of agriculture, kind of legislative framework really going forward. Now it does also deal with the other kind of nations within the UK as well, although it mainly applies to England. So there are powers included in a schedule in relation to Northern Ireland. There's also a schedule there specifically in relation to Wales, and some of the provisions within the Agriculture Act do apply to Wales, although they are intended to be temporary. So essentially the provisions there apply until the end of 2024, when hopefully our Wales Agricultural Act will be in place, which will take over the position thereafter. Scotland as well have introduced legislation in November 2019, which proposes to keep support that is in place as well, similarly to us until the end of 2024, during this kind of transition period in relation to agricultural legislation across the UK. Now, the transition period is probably a word I'm going to use, or a phrase that I'm going to use a lot of times, and it means different things in different contexts, isn't it? So what I'm talking about there is this period of time whereby the implementation of the Agriculture Act happens across the different nations within the UK. So the Agriculture Act in terms of England concentrates very much on public money for public goods, the kind of establishment of the Environmental Land Management Scheme, better known as ELM, talks about plant and tree health, animal health and welfare pathway, and also kind of how they are proposing to support agriculture to create a prosperous and productive sector going forward. And I think the main kind of development in relation to that, that we've seen is the introduction of the Environmental Land Management Scheme and the setting out of what that's going to look like. And it's going to have 3 tiers, which are tailored to the different landscapes and land types that exist within England. So tier 1 is going to be about incentivising environmentally sustainable farming and forestry. Tier 2 is going to be about supporting land managers to deliver locally targeted environmental outcomes. And Tier 3 is going to be about landscape and land use change projects. So a more kind of enhancement, I suppose, and adding value beyond what is delivered under Tier 1 and Tier 2. So that's the kind of the strategic overview of what the ELM scheme will look at. But also there is going to be a more targeted and local approach, especially in tiers 2 and 3, so that the ELM scheme is more targeted and more responsive, I suppose, to the land areas that it is covering going forward. And there are a range of models being discussed and being considered in relation to how advisors are going to be involved in that process going forward, because these ELMs are going to start in late 2024, but over the course of the next 3 years, piloting is going to be done to look at whether this ELM scheme is going to be, is the right one, and any tweaks, etc., that need to be taking place to make sure that it is effective in achieving its aims and objectives and outcomes when it kind of comes into place formally in 2024. And I think that piloting is really important as well, because that gives us an opportunity to see how it works in practice, because as we know, how it works in practice is absolutely essential from an agricultural point of view. And there's going to be a series of events and discussions, etc., to look at what that means. In addition to that, we've had the announcement that there will be a sustainable farming incentive scheme in Wales as well. Now, this is also a kind of a new environmental land management scheme that's going to be trying to encourage and reward farmers for adapting to a more sustainable farming approach. And the aim is to have at least 70% of eligible farms taking part by 2028. So they've set that as the target in terms of participation within the scheme. And interestingly as well, they have announced what the kind of the payment rate under that is going to be as well, which I think is useful for us in terms of advising farmers, isn't it? So that £70 per acre. Per hectare, I should say, is what they're kind of suggesting that the payment might be earning up to, isn't it? The actions that are going to be involved in terms of improvements, they're going to be looking to require farmers to do in terms of outcomes within that, then to achieve that by that time. So, and also there will be provisions within there, not just in terms of land, in terms of soil health, etc. There'll be provisions in there for livestock farmers specifically as well, to be able to look at animal health and welfare abuse, etc. And there are several kind of principles, if you like, that they say are behind what they're looking to do with the sustainable farming incentive, and that is to provide good value for money and achieve ambitious environment and climate change outcomes. So the payments are going to be set because they want to make sure that as many farmers as possible take part in and are involved in these schemes, but at the same time they need to be kind of fair payments in terms of what farmers are being required to do to achieve those outcomes. It's about recognising the value of existing natural assets and not kind of unfairly disadvantaging those who are already achieving good environmental and climate outcomes. And I think that's interesting because in terms of who is eligible for the sustainable farming scheme, isn't it, and whether those that are in existing schemes are eligible. I'll come on to that in a minute. So payments also should form part of a market for environmental outcomes, where schemes participants can earn income from public and private sector sources. So this scheme is hoping to kind of create that bridge, I suppose, between government policy and also what is happening from a private sector point of view in terms of carbon, perhaps, and water management as well. So this is a new scheme. It's going to offer payments for carrying out environmentally sustainable actions such as soil health, hedgerows and integrated pest management. And they are inviting, or going to be inviting, expressions of interest for the pilot, which has begun now in 2021, isn't it? So the pilot window is open for you to be able to look at, kind of expressing an interest in relation to that. And the main types of people that they're looking to involve in that piloting is not just farmers and land managers, but also those that are administering and advising in relation to that scheme. There are indications in relation to what the payment rate is going to be, which we've already talked about, and there are also 3 levels within this scheme as well, of introductory, intermediate and advanced, and each level is more challenging and more rewarding than the previous one, isn't it? And obviously the payment rates go up depending on which one you're in as well. And if you're interested in taking part in that pilot, then it'd be a good idea to kind of contact DEFRA to kind of talk about being part of that pilot scheme, isn't it? Because it's going to be launched nationally in the middle of next year. So it's initially only going to be available to those that are existing BPS claimants, but over time it's intended to extend that and to make it more accessible to other people as well. So if you're looking to be part of the piloting, you need to be an existing recipient of the basic payment scheme. You'd have to enter your land parcels, etc. You need to be able to show that you have management control for the duration of the pilot, which will run until the end of 2024. So that if you're a tenant farmer, you need to be able to show that you've got that that management control, etc., for that period or for that length of time. And it would be only your land parcels that are in England that would be involved. But I would hope and I would assume that they are quite keen to hear from cross-border farmers as well, so that they can really test this in a cross-border setting as well, and enter the land parcels that are not registered common land or shared grazing. And the core kind of elements are about standards in relation to arable and horticultural soils, improved grassland soils, moorland and rough grazing, and the animal health and welfare review. And there are other kind of elements as well in terms of flood risk mitigation, improved water quality, improved biodiversity, and carbon storage. So it's looking to try and incentivise farmers to trying to produce more public goods, and trying to aim towards getting 70% of farmers that are eligible for it to be involved in environmental schemes going forward. Quite interesting that that's compared to a 32% take-up at the moment, isn't it? So it's quite ambitious in terms of its targets, in terms of this scheme, and the rollout of the scheme is going to be incremental, trying to kind of expand on it as they go along and learning from hopefully the pilot that they are now looking to put in place. So, and also in terms of preparing for change, there's also kind of support for improving farm resilience as well, and moving from this current system, we're already calling it old, isn't it, to the new system in terms of countryside stewardship, isn't it? So the last applications for the simplified countryside stewardship scheme is going to be in 2023, and then Elm will be starting in 2024 is what we're told at the moment. And in addition to that, then at the same time, we're going to have this kind of phasing out of direct payments over the 7-year transition that's already started from 2021 to 2027. And those percentage reductions, I'm sure you've had a look at those tables and what that means for you if you're farming in England. But there is going to be that reduction over time. And in addition to that, they are looking at delinking payments as well from 2024, and these optional lump sum payments. So the timeline for change is there. So just to kind of set those out in short form, isn't it, as to when things are starting and when things are finishing. So I've kind of already gone through that to some extent, isn't it, already? But just to give you an indication that things are happening, already, and that you need to be engaging in those changes if there are, and taking advantage of any schemes that are available at the moment that may help you to prepare for that, especially the kind of simplified countryside stewardship schemes that are available at the moment. So I said I'd talk a little bit more about the exit payments that have been kind of announced in England and what that may look like and mean. So the consultation is out at the moment. And this is about kind of managing that 7-year transition where direct payments will disappear. And in 2022, what they're looking to do is offer farmers who wish to exit the industry an option of taking a lump sum payment. So basically getting the rest of that transition period of direct payments in one go. At the same time, or shortly thereafter, they're also then looking to delink direct payments from land for farmers from 2024. Now, as we know, at the moment, in order to be able to claim BPS, you need to have land at your disposal to be able to do so. What they're talking about doing is delinking that relationship. So essentially, if you've got those entitlements, you don't have to have the land to be able to match to them from 2024 onwards. But this is still a consultation at the moment, so there's still an opportunity for you to put your views in relation to that before the 11th of August, in relation to both elements, the lump sum exit scheme and delinking payments. And it's really important to recognise they are two different things. So the lump sum exit payment is talking about giving that lump sum to help farmers to retire and leave the industry, but the delinked payments is talking about kind of breaking that relationship between land and the claims that will continue in relation to BPS until the end of that transition period. And it's quite interesting, really, in terms of those two kind of elements and how they go together, isn't it? Because if from 2024 those payments are delinked, you no longer have to have land, at your disposal thereafter. It may mean that the kind of the exit strategy being offered in the lump sum payment isn't really that attractive. So the idea, is to kind of, give that opportunity for people. But it's really important to look at some of the proposals within the consultation in relation to that lump sum payment. The requirement, for example, as suggested in the consultation at the moment, that all the partners within the business have to retire, not just kind of those that, the individuals in that business who are looking to retire. So if you've already gone through your succession, and you've already brought people into the business, then that lump sum payment is not going to be available to you. And if your view differs from that, then I suggest you kind of, put those kind of comments into the consultation responses. So we've already seen some changes, the removal of EU greening, etc., some simplification in relation to the basic payment scheme, but essentially the basic payment scheme and the document will carry on as it is until 2010, subject to the reduction in kind of the amount that you are paid under that and the delinking that they're proposing to take place in 2024. And I think if we go on, so I just talked about the lump sum payment there, kind of going ahead of myself. Then we've got so the delinking payment, so that is coming to an end in 2024 is the proposal. So halfway through this kind of agricultural transition period, when the kind of direct payments will be reduced by about 50%, isn't it? So after that, it won't be a requirement for you to meet the kind of current BPS rules. You won't have to continue farming in order to receive the payments either, is what's been proposed in the consultation. And that, as I said, there is that gap between 2022 and the kind of the lump sum payment and this delinking in 2024 is an interesting one in terms of timing. So there's a range of other support schemes and grants that they are planning to announce, is what we're told, and the concentration in that lump sum payment is obviously on those that are looking to come out of the industry, but we're told there will be kind of complementary grants available for those that are looking to come into the industry as well, new entrants. So I think it's important to remember that there are schemes perhaps that haven't been announced yet. If there are farmers out there that are thinking about, the lump sum payment next year, it's really important to start looking at that now. Even though the consultation hasn't closed, it's quite clear that they are looking to do that and offer that scheme. And there is a lot of succession planning and considerations in relation to timing, notifications, maybe in relation to tenancies, etc., that need to be taken into consideration in relation to that. So it's really important to start planning, well in advance of that, isn't it? Sustainable farming incentive we talked about, isn't it? And then there's also going to be a local nature recovery and landscape recovery scheme that will be kind of coming into force into 2023, which we hope we'll get more details of soon as well. So why an exit scheme? The idea is the kind of the policy behind it is trying and improve productivity within the industry, etc. And the feeling that that the direct payment is what's causing issues in relation to farm rent prices and land values as well. So in addition to this all going on as well, we have had changes under the Agriculture Act in relation to agricultural tenancies. And the Agriculture Act provides for certain changes in relation to Agricultural Holdings Act tenancies in particular. And since the Agriculture Act, we have had implementing legislation in England. It's important to stress that this is not confirmed in Wales yet. So although Wales are bound by what's in the Agriculture Act in terms of changes, the overarching changes to the Agricultural Holdings Act legislation, the subordinate legislation, the detail as to the changes that will actually take place in relation to the suitability test, the commercial unit test, etc. They haven't been kind of put in detail in Wales yet. So we've had this agricultural holdings transitional provision England regulations that was passed in kind of March this year, and that was to rectify issues with kind of interpretation of the Agriculture Act 2020. And then in addition to that, then we have had another piece of legislation, which is the one which was passed in June this year. And the details of that are on the next slide. So that piece of legislation, which involves details in relation to the rules in relation to the request for landlord's consent or variation of terms and suitability tests for England regulations have now been published, and some bits of that are already in force. In addition to that, we're led to believe that there'll be a code of practice that goes with that as well, which will give more kind of meat on the bones in terms of the details to how those applications are made. So what changes have already happened? So in relation to agricultural holdings Act tenancies, as of the 21st of June this year, tenants now have the power in England to seek variations to tenancies of agricultural holdings, and it allows them to seek variations if they need those variations to enable them to enter into financial assistance schemes which have been introduced by the Agriculture Act 2020. So what they're trying to prevent is an issue whereby tenants couldn't enter into schemes under the Agriculture Act because they didn't have those terms and the ability to do that within their tenancies. So if a tenant wants to get landlord consent or a variation of the tenancy in order to be able to enter into a scheme, there is now a kind of statutory footing for them to be able to serve notice on the landlord requesting that change. And if that change is not agreed to by the landlord, then they can refer that to arbitration. Although that request can't go to arbitration if there's a valid notice to quit in place. So again, there are kind of quite strict conditions attached to that. There are also strict requirements in relation to the notices and the requests that have to be submitted, and it's really important to look at those in detail and to compare really, the description of the proposed activity, the scheme that you're looking to go into, etc., and put all of that kind of relevant information together at the outset before that initial request is made. And what is relevant financial assistance? Well, it's stuff which is amended under the Agriculture Act 2020, essentially. It could also mean financial assistance provided by the Secretary of State in exceptional market conditions, and also financial assistance given to creators and operators of third-party schemes in connection with its creation or operation as well. And also there's been changes in relation to the suitability test. Now it's important to stress that these do not come into force until the 1st September 2024. So the suitability test is part of the kind of one of the elements that in terms of passing on a tenancy to another generation when you've got an intergenerational AHA. And the suitability test has been amended in the Agriculture Act to say that it has to look at different criteria than what we were looking at previously. So the person's experience, training and skills in agriculture and business management is relevant. The financial standing and character of the new incoming tenant is relevant. The holding and the terms of the tenancy is relevant, and also the capacity of that person to farm the holding to a high standard of efficient production and care of the environment is also relevant. So these criteria are quite different to the criteria that we had previously. And so, it's really important to consider if you've got an agricultural holding Act tenancy, that there are changes to these rules, isn't it? So the suitability test has been amended, and that is going to come into force on the 1st September 2024. So it may influence the timing of when you want to do retirement notices, etc. In addition to that, the commercial unit test as well will go as well. So that is another hurdle, if you like, or an eligibility that had to be considered, and that is also being taken away by the Agriculture Act, isn't it? So considerations in terms of timing of applications, in relation to succession and under AHA, whether you want to be under the existing rules or under the new suitability test, or without having to worry about the commercial unit test. and planning ahead is really important in relation to that, and keeping a close eye really on the development of new schemes and statutory requirements, and appreciating this difference between England and Wales. Wales may well follow suit in relation to the tenancy legislation that I've just set out, but that is something that still is subject to actual confirmation. There's consideration in relation to rent and tenancy compensation as well, under the 2020 regulations, which you may want to have a look at as well. Okay, so my section is over. I'm going to pass over to Katie now to kind of carry on with the presentation.
Thank you, Nerys. I will just reshare the screen.
Can everybody hear Katie or not? No audio.
Na, sim sain o gwbl.
Okay.
Apologies, everybody, technical difficulties. It all works brilliantly when it goes to plan, doesn't it? I think we can blame it on the heat, I suppose. Nerys, that hasn't come up. Oh, there we go, lovely. Can we go back one, if that's okay, please? Oh, if you use the arrows just to hit back, there we go, and again. That's okay, lovely. So obviously the element of the bill is looking at coming into sustainable farming scheme and establishing a new support scheme for farmers in Wales, also improving forestry and woodland management regulation and support, and animal health and welfare. So these are the indications of the principles that we're looking to be having going forward. And if we can go on to the next screen if possible. So we're aware of the national minimum standards as well, and the minimum standards will be created under the bill powers, and they will be to accompany proposed legislation. It will be worth noting that these will be a consolidation of existing cross-compliance legislation, so not necessarily the exact ones that we're experiencing under BPS payments at the moment. This advice and guidance will be legal requirements that all farmers will have to comply with, as well as monitoring compliance and enforcement. So there will be criminal or civil sanctions for non-compliance of these national minimum standards. Some of these civil and criminal sanctions will be proportionate, enforcing compliance, as we're all used to at the moment, under the BPS regulations. That some of the primary powers in the bill will be looking to enforce these national minimum standards, as well as animal health and welfare regulations and the new forestry and woodland management regulations. They can also be looking to retain criminal sanctions for serious or repeat offences. Now, these civil sanctions could include compliance notices, restoration notices, stop notices, fixed monetary or variable monetary penalties, and also enforcement undertaking. So it's worth noting, as I said just before, that they're not going to be exactly the same as what we would have under BPS. Now, the sustainable land management seems to be the way forward of what they're considering to be the next scheme in Wales as an overarching principle for future agricultural policy and support. Now, it is still saying that there's a single direct support scheme for farming, and it will replace BPS and the EU agri-environmental schemes, and rewarding farmers for non-market goods. As we're all aware, it's very much going to be encouraging production without adverse environmental impact, and it's based on outcomes, not income foregone or costs incurred as it is currently. As a positive, there'll be a clear brand and marketplace for Welsh produce, which is obviously very important, especially in the time that we're in now with people buying locally on a regular basis. And there will be initial farm sustainability assessments under that scheme as well. As noted, it'll be looking to improve animal health and welfare standards beyond the legal baseline. Now, as we all know, our animal health and welfare standards are very high already, but this will be extended going forward. It'll enable and support our sector to meet net zero targets set out by 2050, to significantly reduce and eliminate ammonia, increase farm biodiversity, and increase levels of carbon sequestration through numerous methods. Now, the forestry and woodland is definitely having a lot of focus at the moment, and there's a number of objectives under this, being the simple, predictable and proportionate approval system for management plans, powers to add conditions to felling licences, and deterrence to prevent illegal felling. And the Sustainable Farming Scheme will provide support to forestry and woodland applications going forward. You may all be aware that there is a target at the moment to increase woodland by 2,000 hectares per annum, rising to 4,000 hectares. So it's a significant target with a lot of hopefully grants coming forward in relation to this. The forestry and woodland element of the scheme will retain powers to review or amend the forestry regulations and the Forestry Act of 1967 as well. So the schemes to the current position in Wales, unfortunately, we are still waiting for the draft bill to come out. So subject to some small amendments, it's likely to be staying until 2040 as a system that we know at the moment. We don't have a definite of when that draft bill will come out, but we are hoping that beginning of 2022, we should see something, if not slightly before. Money coming out to farmers should hopefully be at the same payment rate for the next 3 years. As it has been announced, there is commitment to be supporting BPS until 2022, but there is a caveat that is in relation to the Treasury or the money coming from the UK Treasury. There is no certainty around the new content of the scheme going forward. So we're in a very different position to our counterparts in England, where they've got a 7-year plan, and we're still having to plan on a daily basis. The delinquent payments in Wales, now it's worth noting that this exit payment has been an option in the UK since 1992, but we haven't picked up on it. It is a policy decision, and at the moment the indications are showing that it's unlikely we will be going forward with this in Wales. I thought it would be quite appropriate just to add in some of the grants and schemes that are available at the moment. So some of these you may already have heard over the last 16 to 18 months. This first one is the Bank Back Loan Scheme. This is a 6-year loan at a government set interest rate of 2.5%, and the interest is interest-free for the first 12 months. If you haven't considered applying, it's definitely worth considering. However, before applying, it's worth taking into account any of the state funding received in the previous 12 months, as that will be considered when applying. This is a de minimis, so if, for example, a client has received over £20,000 in state funding, including bounce back loans, then you will not be eligible to receive that BPS support loan that usually comes out in November time, ahead of the BPS payment in December. We've also got the Business Interruption Loan Scheme, which is still available to small and medium-sized enterprises. This is an 80% on each loan guarantee from the government to lenders. and there is no charge for this guarantee. The scheme supports of loans up to 5 million in value, and again, the first 12 months of that finance is interest-free as well, so it's worth considering. Now, rate relief, it's worth noting that there is an extension from the 1st of April 2021 until 31st of March 2022 to the retail, leisure and hospitality rates relief schemes. These are for properties up to a rateable value of £500,000 in Wales. Now, those in the leisure and hospitality sectors with a rateable value of over £5,000 will also receive 100% rates relief for 2021-2022. So it's just a different sector to agriculture, but obviously those of diversification would be worth noting that. The Self-Employment Income Support Scheme 5th grant will be covering May 2021 to September 2021 and will be open to claims from late this month. It is taxable and will be paid out in a single instalment, and we're still waiting for some guidance to come out about claiming this particular grant. Now, the amount will be determined by how much your turnover has been reduced in April 2020 to 2021. This one is still open as well. It opened on the 5th of July until the 20th of August. It's the Rural Business Investment Scheme for non-agricultural. It covers capital investments and supports projects that meet some of the criteria, including diversification, the development of supply chain for natural products, increasing productivity, efficiency and competitiveness of rural businesses. It's worth noting that it's open to existing and start-up non-agricultural micro and small enterprises, including farmers or members of the farming household diversing into non-agricultural activities. It is discretionary, and the amount of the grant offered will relate to individual circumstances, but will always enable that project to go ahead at that minimum level. So it's worth considering if you're looking at diversifying anytime soon. Now, unfortunately, we don't have the next sort of set of dates for some of these grants that are opening. The last lot of windows in RPW grants closed on the 25th of June, so we are waiting the next tranche of windows, but I thought it'd be worth just including some that have previously been available that we're expecting will come around in the next 12 months again. Now, obviously, in relation to Glasssteer, some of those contract holders are still being offered a 1-year extension, but there's no new opportunity to enter those schemes. The Glasssteer small grant schemes, though, have been quite popular this year. It's £7,500 per farm in every window, but you cannot access if part of Glasssteer Advance. It's scored on a parcel basis, which is different in every window, and so far this year we've had landscape and pollinators and carbon, two of which have been very popular, and we've seen a lot of uptake and interest in those. The Sustainable Production Grant, now the last window was the beginning of 2021, so running on that basis, we'd assume that another window will potentially come out at the beginning of 2022. Is targeted towards nutrient and slurry efficiency, and with the NVZ regulations, obviously it's a very important grant to be taken aware of. It's a 40% grant limit of £50,000 with £125,000 spend, with a minimum grant limit of £12,000, which is a £30,000 spend. Now that expression of interest window was open in 2021. Some of you who may have been successful in that expression of interest window will have received contracts that you would agree to, and then you would need to be providing the following information for application: 5-year business plan, nutrient efficiency plan, water efficiency plan, core criteria statement, 3 years of certified accounts, planning permission if appropriate, as well as SEDS approving body approval, and 3 quotes on each investment item selected in the EOI. And that's really important that you do get those 3 quotes before you order any of those items. The Farm Business Grant is another popular one, as well as the Farm Business Grant yard coverings. The Farm Business Grant is a 40% grant rate, and in the previous window there were 80 items listed, from boreholes to cattle crushers, to name a couple. It's a limit of £12,000 per farm, and as I said, the last window was beginning of this year, from May to April. The yard coverings grant closed in June of this year, and again, that is a popular one going forward. We have had some interest in that as a firm, and we're just waiting to hear back from those now going forward. But that's, again, if you have applied for the Farm Business Grant, you don't, and you've taken your £12,000 limit with that Farm Business Grant, you can still apply for the yard coverings. Although similar in name, they are 2 separate grants. And I will hand back to Nerys on that one. But if anyone has any questions, please do utilise the chat function or raise your hand.
We're playing musical chairs here in Pimslite. So thank you very much, Katie. I can see that there are some questions perhaps that you have, or does anybody want to put their hand up and ask me a question, or either of us a question? Or is everybody quite keen to get back outdoors into this heat? I can't see faces a lot of you as well, as you got your cameras off, which means you might be having a lunchtime nap as well, maybe, if you're lucky enough to have one. Any questions anybody wants to raise? I think from my point of view, I think the one thing as well is trying to kind of look at the position that we're in now holistically, isn't it? So there are lots of things going on, there are lots of things changing, and there's quite a few things to consider perhaps as a farming business in terms of what we need to be doing, really, isn't it, to try and maximise the grants that are available at the moment. And also to try and make sure that we time it properly as well, isn't it? I think it's quite a challenging time, I think, in terms of making sure that we're making the right business decisions at the right time to kind of fit in with the schemes that are available, and what's going on within the industry. Has anybody got any questions you want to? Carwyn, you've got a question there. Are there any discussions being had with the Welsh Government for a replacement environmental scheme? So Karen, that's basically what the sustainable farming scheme is going to be, and that is going to be an overarching scheme, if you like, which is going to encompass what's in the BPS, essentially, I suppose, and kind of what's currently being dealt with under Glassdeer. So the plan is for that sustainable farming scheme to be the one scheme going forward, overarching everything. And I suppose you could argue that simplifies the position, isn't it? Because we're not going to be dealing with multiple schemes at the same time. But the impression I get from the proposals that have come so far, with the sustainable farming scheme, is that there will be a range of kind of options, if you like, within that scheme, isn't it? And that there will be a bespoke kind of sustainable farm plan being done, looking at that specific farm and looking at what prescriptions and what actions need to be undertaken by that farm in order for it to satisfy its requirements under the scheme. So that's going to involve things from soil health through to animal welfare, through to biodiversity, etc. So it's going to be an all-encompassing type of scheme, really. And then Jeremy, you've got a question there. Do you think there may be another young entrant type scheme again? Gosh, I think we all wish there would be, don't we? I think it'd be really nice to have another young entrant type scheme. I mean, we've been very fortunate in Wales, really, because we have we have had young entrant schemes, and the reality is that other areas of the UK haven't had those same schemes, isn't it? So we have had two young entrant schemes over the last 6 to 7 years, isn't it? And both, I'm sure, have helped a number of businesses to kind of move towards their succession plans and to assist with that process, isn't it? So I think there's it would be really nice to have another young entrant scheme. I think the question, though, is what kind of young entrant scheme we have, and whether we can learn from some of the aspects that we've had in these schemes we've had so far, and perhaps adapt them and improve them again in terms of what that young entrant scheme might look like. The other option, I suppose, for Welsh Government would be to look at developing the sustainable farming scheme, but with an add-on which has an element which is supportive of young entrants looking to come into that scheme. So that, I think, is another option, is that we might see it as part of that. But it is quite clear in terms of the aims and objectives from a policy point of view, they are looking for transformational change within the industry, and that they are definitely looking to kind of bring new entrants in, not just perhaps from from existing agricultural business, so young people coming into the industry, but also people coming into agriculture from other industries and other areas of expertise, isn't it? So I think that's important as well in terms of new entrants, so that we're not just talking about perhaps young people coming in, isn't it? And looking at options in relation to that. If you want to add anything you can stop me talking about that. But it's difficult because the mic isn't working properly. And then, Mark, you've got a question. Will rural advisor be doing nutrient management plans for farms to meet the new pollution? Yes, definitely. So we've already been doing lots of nutrient management plans from an English point of view under the NVZ regulations that exist there, and with the new regulations in place in Wales now, we've been looking to do the same in Wales via our new sister company. So yes, definitely part of the plan, and unfortunately something that we're all going to have to engage in as farmers going forward in terms of the new pollution regulations, isn't it, and get the grips with what those new rules require us to do. Any other questions anybody's got or would like to ask? Now's your chance. Ask any questions you've got. We've tried to go through kind of the different kind of themes as comprehensively as we can, but there's a lot of unanswered questions, and there's still a lot of uncertain kind of positions going forward. John, asking whether we'd be doing a farm carbon calculator. We will be assisting farmers with that, yes, but there is also a Farming Connect scheme as well, which is going to be providing that kind of carbon calculator service as well. So there's going to be an option to be able to do it via Farming Connect. So it's really important to kind of have a look at that and the kind of the funding that's going to be available in order to be able to have those assessments done, because it is going to be an important it's really going to be an important thing for all farmers to be doing going forward. The other thing I think which is on the kind of horizon, if you like, as well, is kind of biodiversity mapping on farms as well. Because I think that may well be something that comes into elements of the new sustainable farming scheme, and it might be something that you're already being asked to engage in based on your kind of contracts you have with, in terms of where your meat goes, etc., isn't it? So I think we've personally, we were doing carbon calculators back 10 years ago, isn't it? Because that was a requirement that we had to do as part of our kind of supply chain contract at that stage, isn't it? But I think it's going to become more mainstream and something that everybody needs to have a look at, isn't it? Any other questions or comments?
We will put it on our YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Try and email it out and I've got a poll.
Okay, so Katie just reminded me to tell you that you'll put this recording on our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to then, if you want to share that with other people as well, you're more than welcome to do so. And yeah, so there'll be a copy of the slides then on that, so you'll be able to see the slides on our YouTube channel and enjoy going through our kind of swap over in the middle as well, isn't it, in terms of our technical difficulties either. So yes, we'll try and edit that if we can, and then so you're welcome to have a look at that afterwards and share that afterwards, isn't it? So you can have a look at the presentation afterwards. And then just to finish off, I've got one more question, Katie, but there is a poll as well we're going to ask you to take part in at the end, if that's okay, just so we can gauge an understanding of what you might like to hear from us again, if we did something like this similarly again. Elwyn, you're asking who will pay for the tenant landlord mediation. Are you talking about the kind of the mediation or the arbitration in relation to variations to the tenancy, or are you talking about something else? Do you know? You can ask it direct to Ellen if you want.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, with the if the landlord wants to let you do the environmental stuff, you said that there'd be some mediation service for the tenants to appeal. Who would be paying for those costs?
Yeah, so there is no provision for that to be paid for, isn't it? So the mediation or the mediator cost, isn't it, or the arbitrator cost, if we went to arbitration, you know, that still has to be paid by the landlord or the tenant, isn't it? So I think what you're indicating is it's still going to be an expensive process, isn't it? So if you're a tenant that needs consent for certain improvements on your farm because you want to go into one of these schemes, isn't it? It's still going to be an expensive process if the landlord says no, isn't it? I think
Yep.
I think though what the legislation does probably do, because it's putting that on a statutory basis, is encourage landlords and tenants to have constructive, sensible discussions about what they should be doing, because essentially if the landlord says no, they are facing that process, they are facing that cost and that expense, isn't it? So it'd be much better from both parties' point of view, isn't it, to have those discussions without prejudice if needed, isn't it, to try and resolve that issue without the need for that, more formal mediation or arbitration, etc. So you'd hope that just putting it on a statutory footing, it prevents some of that cost, isn't it, because it encourages those discussions to take place, isn't it? But I think, there's also a wider, more global picture here in terms of, the benefit to the holding of those improvements and being part of those schemes as well, isn't it? So, I would hope that would encourage landlords to be, open to that discussion as well, isn't it, in terms of those improvements that would take place in the holding as well. But no money for it, unfortunately. Sorry, Aaron. Any other questions? I've missed any there now, have I? Yeah, so as I said, we'll leave it there if that's okay. Thank you very, very much for joining us. I'm really sorry that we're not able to be on the showground enjoying a glass of something and some cream tea as we usually would on the stand, but it's been really nice to see you. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi gyd am gymryd rhan, am gofyn cwestiynau ac am fod gyda ni, and we hope to do some further webinars going forward, and that's what Katie's going to send to you now as a quick little poll. If you could do that before you exit the meeting, just to indicate to us what you'd like to hear from us about going forward, and what topics that would give you value and would be of benefit if we covered them in any webinars going forward. So diolch yn fawr, mwynhewch diwrnod, enjoy your day, enjoy the sunshine. Okay, so Kate, if you've got any comments you've got in terms of future kind of topics, put them in the chat and we'll pick them up